Welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will Frantz, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. Tonight, I want to talk about how effective training is often not all that interesting to look at, or at the very least, like an effective training plan isn't always very interesting to read, right? Like, very likely, there will be long blocks where you more or less do the same thing for weeks on end. You're going to do similar workouts on similar days for some chunk of time. And then there will often be like a different type of workout on similar days for another chunk of time. And ideally, we will start with the stuff that is like less directly applicable to your event. So if you're running a 5K as your goal, then you're probably going to have some like high intensity VO2 speed stuff, like all the way up almost to race day, or at least until your taper. Whereas if you're doing a 200 miler, then you'll probably spend a lot of time hiking at a quick clip for hours and hours and hours on end. And no matter what, like we want to funnel towards what we're looking for, and we want to do it in blocks so that we can actually get good at the thing we're doing. Now, this can also be exercises. Like if we are looking at a client of mine at the club who is a swimmer, we are currently building strength for her, but she wants to swim to Alcatraz in this coming summer. And we will be doing a lot of like tricep kickbacks where you like lean over and press back. Typically, it is one of the goofiest exercises you can do for a tricep. It's just not very effective. If you want to know why, I'm happy to tell you. Now, I'm not going to get super into it. But for a swimmer, it's really effective because when she says she extends underwater, it is this position that often catches her up or she feels like she gets burnt out. So we're going to funnel exercises as well. This can also be just phases for runners, like in what is now most people's off season, doing a lot of heavy strength work for people to build this like base strength, get the body moving as a unit, build the central nervous system, and like teach your entire bodily system to work together and just build this heavy load. Also, bones, heavy loads help build bones. Now, if we're moving more towards race, we're going to take a lot of that heavy load off, partially just to take some stuff off of your central nervous system and give your body a break or more space to do the running stuff that we're really trying to get ready for. And we also want to be able to include more like explosive plyometric stuff so that we can be like poppy and reactive and have that explosivity out on the trail or road or whatever where we need it. Now, no matter what though, we're not going to like switch workouts week to week. For most people, it's going to take, like, unless you've been training for years and years and years, it's going to take a week or two for you even to get comfortable with some of the movements. If you've never done a heavy squat before, then it might take a week for you to really connect to that movement. It might take you another week to start to like find the real load you're working for. And then it might actually put another like 3 or 4 weeks of the actual proper loading into your system once we have found the movement and found the load that we're looking for. If you're not comfortable with a movement, then you're not going to be able to load it heavy enough to actually create change. Now, there should be some variability. There should be some changing to your workouts. If you're doing the exact same thing week to week, we're not going to see as much progress or as much like directed change as we'd want. Should also obviously be increasing the weights. If you just lift the 10-pound dumbbells because that's what you lift, that's probably not appropriate unless it's something like a lateral raise for a muscle that's really inherently weak. Then we might just try to add a rep occasionally. But for the most part, we're going to keep trying to increase the weight or increase the reps or whatever. But we're going to we should do something long enough that we can like find a groove and then actually get something out of the workout. We don't want so much variability that we might as well have just like thrown darts blindfolded at a board to create our training plan. Like there should be a purpose to every exercise. If you're doing your own training, you should Know why you're doing what you're doing. There should be a point to what you're doing. And if you're not doing, then at the very least, your coach or the person who wrote your training plan should have an intention for all the stuff you're doing. Now, like CrossFit is a great example of the opposite. And this is why CrossFit is not really an effective training methodology unless you want to get good at CrossFit. You will make progress, but most people will make progress with anything because they'll make progress with anything because they have not done enough of a thing, be it squats or whatever, to like need particular programming. It doesn't mean it's the best. It doesn't mean it's ideal. It just means for a lot of people, if you've never done strength training, then you're going to get fairly strong for you fairly quickly because we could kind of just throw darts at a board. Now, a lot of the problems with CrossFit come from the fact that they use very effective movements, but they do them in a way that lead to a lot of injury unless you have a really good coach. So it's not the best. It is just a way to help people who have never really trained before see some progress. Now, we see the same thing with running. When we first start running, anything is going to help you make progress. If you're really new, it doesn't really matter what you do. We just need to run more as long as you don't get injured. It doesn't mean that your training plan from 3 years ago when you first started out and saw that quick progress was great. It just meant that you had such improvement to make that you were going to make it fairly quickly. It doesn't mean it's the best. It doesn't mean it's the fast path. It doesn't mean that it's smart. It just means that when you're new to something, we can throw stuff at the wall and it'll work. But there are often better ways and ways that make progress faster, and they can be kind of boring. If we're going to look at something like corrective exercise, this is a big thing in the training space for good reason. A lot of people are injured, or a lot of people have been like sitting at a desk for so long that we're like hunched forward, and we just have movements that we aren't very good at, and we're not very balanced in the body. Now, I pick on the glutes a lot, and I'm going to pick on them here again. I'm going to also talk about my shoulder because it actually has some permanent damage to it. But if we look at runners, we often talk about getting the glutes stronger or using them better. Now, we can often see people on the internet do things like hip bridges to do that, which is fine if you have a couple prerequisites. One, do you actually have the hip extension to do it? And then for people to test this, I put them through a Thomas test. Like you're going to lay on the edge of a table or a bed or whatever, a box if I'm at the gym, and your butt is going to be slightly hanging off the edge of the box. You're going to grab one knee and let the other leg dangle. And ideally, your dangling knee is going to be a little bit below your hips. It means that you have passive hip extension. It means that your like hip flexors, your psoas, your rectus femoris, and your quad are not so tight that it's actually limiting your range of motion to help you get into something like a hip bridge. If you pass that test, then we can absolutely use hip bridges or hip thrusts or whatever to connect to the glutes. And if we're able to load those movements heavy enough, then we can use them to strengthen the glutes. Now, hip thrusts, fantastic. I do them with people. We just got it's called a booty builder at the gym. Goofy name, very effective thing. And hip thrusts are annoying because you are able to load them really heavy for most people, and as a result, like they're a real pain in the butt to set up, right? But we'll often even get more out of like deadlifts and squats if you're able to include those a little more regularly. Now, if you don't have the hip extension, then we need to probably make some progress there first. I know people whose psoas and or like front of their quad is so tight that when they do a Thomas test, their knee sits like well above their hip. And if we can't get that passive extension, then we're very likely going to struggle to load it in an active way in any real fashion, right? Now, the corrective part here for looking at this would be twofold, like stretching regularly, ideally daily, to like relax the hip flexors and like achieve that passive hip extension. Then we could do some regular bridges or hip thrusts to really connect to the glutes. And once we get there, we can also do these squats and deadlifts to really build the strength in that muscle. Now, I said I'd also pick on my own shoulder, so let's talk about that. This shoulder, my left one, is separated. It sits half an inch to an inch lower than the other one, and it was annoying. It's fine-ish now. I don't recommend it. It is one of the most painful things I've experienced, but it has taken work to rebuild. And I rebuilt the musculature around there with heavy overhead pressing. And at the time, it was like single arm kettlebell presses and handstand work. Now I do more barbell stuff. But I also had to get my rotator cuff to work properly. Now this is where that like corrective part came in. It took a long time, for being super honest, because I wasn't a trainer and I had no idea what I was doing. I was an idiot 25-year-old who was just trying to make things work again. Now, if I had to do this over, I would take one of these bands, I would anchor it like in a door, like here, and then we would do a lot of these things where upward shoulder rotations. So I could reconnect to the muscles in my rotator cuff and make them work in a way that allowed me to press safely overhead. But I still needed to do the overhead work in order to build the musculature to be strong. Now, there's been overhead pressing in my life almost every week, and we'll see the same thing if we look at running. Just like if we're training for a marathon, there's going to be a lot of slow running every week. There's going to be a lot of tempo or like lactate runs almost every week. There's going to be a lot of long runs almost like week or every other week, depending on who your coach is. And it can be kind of boring. The fun part is trying to get better at the individual workout. It's not like I don't know how to press a thing over my head. I try to press more weight, or I try to do a variation that stimulates it a little differently. Like when we are setting up a training plan, be it running or strength or whatever, the thought process really shouldn't be like, I wonder what I can throw at myself and get through it. It's more like this exercise or this workout should lead to this adaptation, and I'm going to try to get better at it every week so that I can create the adaptation I'm looking to create. And this is why effective training plans just don't look all that interesting. It's a lot of the same type of stuff week in, week out, and it leads to slow, consistent improvements so that a couple months or like even years later, you're way better as an athlete. But again, day to day, it's just not that interesting. And one of the ways that we often fail to effectively execute good training plans is we don't put the hard work into the things that we really should be. So if we're looking at a workout like a lactate threshold run, if you're running the exact same pace or the exact same time, if you have these tempo workouts and it's more or less the exact same workout week after week after week, we should either be trying to add a set or add some time or go a little faster so that we're making these improvements. If we're just running a 10-minute pace for 3 sets of 10 minutes for like week in, week out for 6 weeks on end, then we're not going to see a ton of progress. You might see a little bit because it'll be less suffering at the end of it, but for the most part, we're trying to push it a little bit just past that like threshold of comfort. Now, perfect example is a client of mine at the gym. He comes to me 3 times a week. I've seen him like 60 or 70 times, and there have been a couple breaks over the past 6 to 9 months. And when he first came to me, we would often have to take like entire sessions just to get his low back to stop being mean. He has a massive shoulder injury that he has had surgery on. He has some crooked hips. He has had an ankle reconstruction, like all of the stuff from being a high-level college athlete without great reparative maintenance that we don't do when we're 20. And now, after 9 months of work, he is pressing half of his body weight over his head. He's squatting more than his body weight. And like week to week, there just wasn't that much change, but the progress over 9 months has been amazing. And I can tell you, because I wrote it, that the training plan just isn't all that interesting. We do use some of the fun tools at the gym so he doesn't get bored, and we make sure that they, work in the way that we need to. For example, he has shoulder stability stuff because it was cut open. So we do wobbly things and instead of just pushing a barbell overhead. But week to week, it's really just move weight and then move more weight and then move the same weight for a few more reps and then move less weight for a lot more reps and then move more weight again. It's not all that interesting. We squat weekly, we deadlift weekly. Sometimes it's a barbell, sometimes it's a sandbag, sometimes it's a kettlebell, sometimes it's a trap bar, but we deadlift weekly. We overhead press stuff. Sometimes it's a barbell, sometimes it's seated, sometimes it's it's called an earthquake bar where you hang bands off the end of it with kettlebells attached to them. But it's the same basic movements week in, week out. And he's gotten immensely stronger. And this is kind of what our running looks like as well. And if we have a training plan that is fairly repetitive and we put in the work to it, it is going to be much more effective than this like constantly cycling of different workouts from week to week, where 1 week is a pyramid and then the next week is this like 5 by 3 minute hill thing. And then the next week is 3 by 10 minute lactate threshold stuff. And then the next week is whatever. And we need to target the adaptation long enough to actually start to get good at the workout and create some change. And this can be different if you've been doing a really long time. If you were able to drop in and know exactly what that workout should feel like and make some progress. But for the most part, needs to be same week in, week out. And if we look at the professionals, people who get paid to do this stuff, that's exactly what their training looks like. It's the same basic structure, week in, week out, and they just get better at it week after week, month after month, year after year. And that's why they get better. They're not constantly chasing novelty. They're not like looking to be entertained by their workouts. They're just looking to improve. And if you're looking for more of the entertainment factor, that is fantastic, but we shouldn't be puzzled when we're not making a ton of improvements, when we're not following a training plan that necessarily leads to improvements. I'm out for the night. I hope you have a great rest of your night. I'll post this up as a podcast tomorrow. And then this weekend, I'm going to post one with Nat Collins. He's a PT. He and I had a great conversation a few weeks ago before I went into a depressive funk, and I will get that up shortly. Hope you have a great rest of your night. Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it. Or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.